Hey everyone, my name is Bart Smikla. I will be our today's host of our today's call. At the beginning, I would like to remind everybody about our code of conduct, which we can summarize as be excellent to each other. Is there anyone who's new at our calls and would like to introduce himself, herself, themselves? Okay, I cannot hear anyone. So let's jump right into our call and our items. Oh, I'm always forgetting. I need note taker and an action items manager. So if there is anyone who would like to help with that area, I would be really glad.
Tag notes. Well, I will try to tag actions, but
Perfect. Please add your names to our attendees list, and let's jump into the billing review. Let me share my screen.
Tell me, let's look at what dates we got and I will refresh my view.
Sure, one moment. Sure. Let me first find this.
June 10th to July 7th.
June 10 to July 7. I was close. July 7, June 10. I was off by 2 days. All right, without looking at your number, the number I get is 20,101 in pennies.
So we have here 20,535.
There we go. I call that close enough for government work.
Yeah, I think so too. So the only thing is that 22nd of July, there was some spike, but I don't remember where was the try of the vanity domain switch. I think it was.
That probably was right around the 22nd when we started it and then aborted it. And I'll explain that in a minute. So the lion's share of this is compute. The lion's share, if we group by project, is going to be in prow. I mean, there's a tall stack of small projects, but the biggest one by far is wg-k8s-infra prow build. So the question is, at what point do we start actually managing cost? Like, I'm just pontificating, but how much of the cost here is due to flaky tests? The fact that we can now start to maybe put numbers on these things is really interesting to me.
You're not seeing any costs due to flaky tests right now. This is part of why what I've intentionally set as the first goal to migrate are just the jobs that show up on the release blocking dashboards. So those are jobs that run periodically.
Okay.
So they don't run any more frequently. There's no fluctuation based on retest or volume of PRs or anything like that.
Excellent. Okay. That's great to know.
Yeah.
So then the question to follow up then is, like, is this number correct, right? Are we comfortable with the idea that we're spending $7,800 a month on tests, just these recurring tests? Obviously, as a project, these are very, very valuable tests. I just have no idea what the dollar number is, or if it's worth any engineering effort to try to move the needle.
I don't know that off the top of my head. The engineer in me would love to advocate for less flaky tests and more efficiency, but the amount of time and resources that may require needs to be evaluated against the costs. I don't have a number for what percentage of the total cost of testing this represents, but I imagine it's under a quarter, maybe 10%. So There's a
Interesting.
lot more cost out there. So I view it more from the perspective of these are the jobs I know we care about. The next tier from here that I would go would be all the jobs that block merge into Kubernetes. And then I would start to raise the question, okay, based on these costs, do we want to lower these costs, or do we want to migrate more jobs over, or do we think we need all those other jobs? Stuff like that.
Right.
But it's just
Yeah,
not
I think that's an interesting. It's an interesting question, and the reason I think it's interesting to ask right now is as soon as we flip GCR over, this will be noise, right? This is margin compared to what the current GCR costs look like. And obviously, we're going to have the same conversation around GCR. Like, is it normal that we're actually experiencing these level of costs, or is it abnormal? Is something going wrong we can see? My gut feeling, Aaron, I think agrees with you here. It's probably not. There's probably no low-hanging fruit. Like, we're probably not going to cut this cost in half with any engineering work, so it's probably not worth digging into. At least not at this point. So, okay, I think I'm happy with this. Anybody have any questions on it? All right. So maybe I can speak to the domain stuff for a moment. So what happened last couple weeks ago is basically the credits that Google funded ran out for the second year, and my calendar was off by a week, and so the account ran dry. We decided not to proceed with the vanity flip just because I didn't want to run up the bill while we didn't have the credits in the account. Currently, we had a stopgap credit that we issued for 100K. That's in now. We're currently running through that. The rest will be in soon. The ticket is filed. We're just jumping through hoops. So then we can restart the vanity domain flip. I'm hoping that those credits will clear this week so that we can start again on Monday, if everybody's cool with that. If they don't,
I think we lost him.
You lost your video and mic.
Yeah.
Oh,
Chrome crashed on me. Cool. Oh, snap. Zoom went away. So I forget what I was saying. We have to make a call if we don't get the credits in by Friday. Do we try again if it could be on Wednesday? I don't want to run it into the weekend. I want to start it on a Monday. So hopefully we can get them in this week. Once the projection of the numbers is actually sort of interesting. As part of this effort, I just sort of played out what the growth has been and what it looks like. It's been pretty much linear growth month to month. At this rate, we're going to burn through $2 million-ish by this time next year, which is great. We have $3 million in credits. That leaves us about $1 million to play with for the rest of the year. And that would include all any linear growth that I'm missing. So like if Prow continues to get bigger, I didn't account for that. If we move new projects over, I didn't account for that. $1 million is a lot of money, but it's not infinite money. So at some point we will have to discuss like what engineering are we going to spend on cost optimizing and investigating and those sorts of things. So I just think it was interesting. At the beginning, 3 million felt like literally infinite money, like we could do anything we wanted. And now we're like, oh, actually, maybe we need to budget.
Yeah.
But that's a problem for tomorrow.
Thank you, team, very much for handling the situation with credits. I was also not aware that it's so soon. Okay, so are there any questions about this topic, suggestions or others? I don't see any, so let's jump into the open discussion. Maybe before Aaron, are there any updates in Pro migration? Because we didn't speak about this last
No, my priorities have shifted. So it's basically been running the exact same load for a month now, I think. The last set of jobs that I migrated over were the 100 node scalability jobs. Um, and so that gives us an idea of like, that's why to me, like if you look at this cost, this is almost the steady state cost for release blocking stuff. Not entirely. Like we don't have everything that's in the release informing dashboard, like the 5,000 node scalability jobs. And we don't have um, a couple other jobs related to like GPU ingress and release engineering jobs that currently, like we need to set up an alternate bucket for them to write to and stuff. But otherwise, no updates from my end.
So when I mentioned the $1 million is not infinite money, I was literally thinking about the 5K scale tests, because I think the 5K scale tests will actually push that pretty hard.
Yes.
Is that something we want to try to move over this year? It feels like a long time away to say, well, we're going to live another 12 months without moving that work over. 11 months.
Uh, yeah, I suppose. Um, I feel like that's maybe a broader conversation to have with SIG release and SIG scalability in the mix, because I believe SIG scalability would say it's absolutely important that the 5,000 node jobs be used to uh, evaluate whether the release goes out the door. I know those jobs live on an informing dashboard, but they still sort of get to escalate and block the release if there's something that looks wrong there. And so to me, I feel like the community is fully funded in control of its own destiny if all of the CI that it runs to block release runs in the open and is funded. And right now, we're not quite there, right?
Yep.
So
I agree. I really would like to see it move. It seems like a symbolic thing, if nothing else. Um, so maybe after we get the domain flip over and we actually are confident that the numbers are what we think they are, and not like 2x what we think they are, then we can start talking about what do the costs of this actually look like, and is this the next priority target?
Uh, okay, I will just say out loud from my perspective, I have no real feel for whether those 5K node jobs would be the larger cost, or if I looked at the cost of all of our pre-submit jobs.
Sure.
Uh, like we do have, we run up a hundred node cluster for every pull request to sort of help scalability catch stuff early. And that's one of those things where maybe I would question whether evaluate the value of that.
Yes. Yes. This is where I think the real engineering is going to come in, of like, what tests do we really need to run on every pull request, and how do we hold the, like, every flaky test causes real spend soon, and eventually we'll be able to say, like, here's a graph, right? The flakier the tests get, the higher the bill gets.
Yeah. Um, so either of those sound great to me. They're kind of low in my queue at the moment, but if anybody's interested in stepping up to help out, I will gladly show them the ropes.
Okay, so any questions? Okay, so as I see, Linus, could you give us some brief update about container image promoter?
Sure. I don't really have much of an update because I think Tim kind of addressed the stuff around billing. That was the main issue that caused us to revert the flip that we attempted a couple weeks ago. So, yeah, as he said, we still want to try it again on a Monday. So, yeah, earliest possible next flip date is possibly next Monday, but that's assuming that we know for sure that the dust has settled around billing. I suppose by tomorrow or something like that, because I don't want to send out an email on a Friday saying, "Hey guys, let's do the flip" on a Monday, or just right after the weekend. So yeah.
So I pinged the billing process today, and we'll see if we get a confirmation on it. I can see it directly now in the billing account, so I will know sort of categorically when the credits are applied.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions about container image promoter, domain flip, etc.? Okay, so I think that Nikita, your topic is next about splitting the groups.yaml file.
Yeah. So before I talk about the main issue, just for context, if people are not familiar with what groups.yaml is, it's a huge YAML file which contains configuration for our G Suite email groups. We have a ton of them, and the YAML file is really huge. So the idea is that we should split it into multiple groups.yaml files so that's easier to maintain. What I wanted to talk about, so I have a PR I created over the weekend to do this, and I think it also already is approved. But what I wanted to talk about was the policy about how we split group.yaml file and what's the whole process around it. To see the discussion, I have a suggestion. So what I had in mind was we allow groups.yaml files to be categorized as per SIG or working group, and let the SIGs and working groups also have subdirectories if they want. So they'll decide how they want to have it. But like at the root, like when I say root, I mean the groups directory. At the root, we'll let SIGs figure out what they want to do with it. Because eventually, if you're looking at who owns this, you're gonna come up to a SIG at the end of the day. That's point one. And the second point would be, how do we then use owners files if we are having multiple directories? Again, I had two approaches. I'm leaning towards the second one. The first one is the current state of the PR is to allow root owners to approve, because we want to have control over adding new groups. We don't want SIG leads or whoever are in the owners files to just approve additional groups without, I guess, the K8s-infra working group being okay with it. So we want the root owners, well, root as in groups owners, to approve, and the SIG owners would just review PRs. That's option one. The option two that I'm leaning towards is that we also allow the SIG owners to approve changes to existing groups, but then we set it up such that root owners will approve addition of new groups. How we do this is that we'll have an auto-generated file. I know like lots of auto-generated stuff, we don't want that, but we have an auto-generated file which could be like group list or something like that with a better name. And that would contain simply just a list of all groups. And if someone adds a new group to any of the like hierarchical groups.yaml files, that needs to be listed. Well, they'll run something like a make command, and that gets listed in this list file. And since that list file is in the root, so we'll have root owners approve it. Does that make sense? Like I wrote this down in notes, so it probably makes sense if you read that through, but that's kind of the idea. Thoughts,
Thank you.
concerns?
Thank you for jumping on this. I've been thinking about this over the last day or two, and I wanted to ask the question of, what are we trying to do with these groups? What I mean is, historically, we made a decision in the steering bootstrap that we didn't want at kubernetes.io to become a status symbol for people to have on their personal mailing list. So we said, we're not giving people G Suite accounts. And we sort of also decided that we didn't want to make all of the SIG mailing lists be these G Suite groups. But that decision, I think, was less well-founded. Like, SIG foobar at googlegroups.com versus SIG foobar at kubernetes.io. Does it really matter? Like, actually, it kind of makes sense to own it ourselves, because we can do things like automation, right? But we didn't want to switch everybody over. The hardest part was, we had so many groups already. You can't make public groups be a member of a group. And so you can't like chain them, but you can do that for private, for G Suite groups. So we decided at some point in the past that we didn't want to make this for sort of arbitrary SIG groups. So the question that I've been sort of chewing on all night was, does it make sense for SIGs to have any voice in this group's YAML structure, or is the groups really for infrastructure? And we can still create a hierarchical structure, but the structure is not SIG related, it's like purpose related. Like I would have no problems delegating to some owner's file all of the staging repositories, right? And some small group of people say, we're dealing with all the staging and image promotion stuff, so we're going to approve all the staging ones. But it's not SIG aligned, it's more purpose aligned.
So about that, it's funny you bring that up because we discussed a similar point in the steering committee meeting on Monday. So country Bex, like I haven't been doing most of the work. I want to give credit to Bob and George. They've been looking at how the SIG leads mailing lists have been set up, and the thing that they've noticed is that a lot of them have stale owners, and we don't. And because they weren't updated, we haven't been able to contact them, and we don't have control over them anymore. And these leads groups have access to a bunch of calendars and things like that. So the idea that we decided in the steering committee was to have SIG foo leads at kubernetes.io groups for leads. I don't know if we want to have them for like the SIG itself, but the idea is that we will have leads groups for all SIGs, which makes sense for SIGs to manage themselves.
Sorry, does
Yeah,
that mean a group per SIG or a group for all leads?
We already
have a
have
group
the
for all.
latter.
Yeah. So a separate group for each SIG, two in
Okay.
addition to the.
So
one
I
for
have
all
no
leads.
real problem with that. Like I said, the main reason I think for not making all the SIG mailing lists on there was just inertia. They were all already on Google Groups, and it's too difficult to migrate people over because we can't chain them. I'm okay with making it, giving SIGs more authority here. I just want to be careful that it doesn't become a vanity thing or get sort of spammed with a million different groups.
Yep. It's kind of related to steering committee, I guess. We talked about who'd approve new groups requests, and the thing that we came up with was contribex. Like steering doesn't really need to make those decisions, and it would delegate it to contributor experience and this working group. I've been thinking about it, and I'm not really sure how that delegation would be split. I think contribex doesn't really need to come in on this, and this working group can decide whether, like, what is that new group being added and if it's necessary.
Would
What do y'all think?
Google Groups align to like working groups? Like there's a process for creating a working group, right? Like are those things one-to-one, or are there going to be more mailing lists than there are working groups?
There should be one-to-one, but I guess we could have one-off requests. There is a one-off request right now for a calendar at kubernetes.io for automation purposes.
That's
But
for an account though, not a group.
yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think one-off like universal things totally cool. Like creating a group for every SIG lead for every SIG, totally reasonable. What I'm questioning is, is there any reason why, say, SIG Network would want 5 new groups that have no mapping in other SIGs? Like, I can't think of a reason why that would be something we want to do if they're not aligned to working groups. Like, working group is our formal structure, right?
Or sub projects, you mean?
Or sub projects, yes.
So this is sort of why I guess I asked Nikita to take a look at policy. We can encode these sorts of things in tests so that like PRs will fail if they don't adhere to whatever our well-defined policy is. We just actually have to decide what we want the policy to be and then write the tests to enforce that. The super lo-fi approach is Nikita's option 1, where we keep final approval with members of this group who have the policy sort of vaguely floating around in their head, and they get final approval. And then option 2 seems sort of like a compromise where like we sort of have this vague policy thing floating in our head as far as what group names are allowed to exist. And so we get final sign off on that. But then once somebody has gone through us for that, membership changes and stuff don't need to go through us. That was the compromise that sounded like it sort of would unblock most people. From my perspective, I still have some slightly little paranoid things about, like, would we want to allow arbitrary people to change arbitrary settings on their Google groups? Or is that something that we would want some kind of sign off on? And so
I was thinking about that last part too, whether it makes, like, we have all of our options encoded in that YAML, and how many groups actually change those options other than trivially, right? Like, could we just take away those options and be more comfortable with the fact that all the groups are the way they're supposed to be?
I enforce most of that, but I don't know that it's, we have tests in place now that enforce most of that, but not universally. So we would need to look at other options and stuff. There are also groups that exist sort of slightly outside the scope of SIGs and working groups today. For example,
Yeah.
the Product Security Committee, and there are a couple different security lists that have special settings and special membership. So I'm amenable to either of these compromises Nikita proposes. If we want to, the more we want, the less we want to have the overhead of having to approve this stuff, the more we should write down so that somebody can encode these into test form.
Yeah, at the same time, this is not a high frequency operation. So, you know, we should trade off like the engineering of building a really robust system versus like just put humans in the way. It's fine until it is not fine anymore.
Yeah.
I'm fine with either approach. Nikita, I'm happy to leave it to you.
I like option 2 because it also, like, it, sorry, Bart, you were saying?
No, I just wanted to say that I don't have very strong opinion, but the option 2 sounds a little bit better for me, but I'm open to anything you choose.
I guess for like SIG foo leads mailing lists, I know it's not a one-stop solution for like leads mailing list. We could set up tests to ensure that they have a set of settings, I guess. But yeah, we couldn't control if someone changes the distributor's mailing list, but I don't think that'll happen. I mean,
the alternative is that we use a different YAML schema and we say, like, this is our YAML schema, right? So here's the group, here's the name, and here's the kind of group it is. Well, this is a SIG group, okay? Well, that means this blob of pattern, or this blob of config, and this is a security group, and therefore it has this different blob of config, right? I mean, if we want to get all engineering with it.
I can do it. I mean, it's not a big deal, really.
So I'm not on the hook for maintaining it. So I'm going to leave it to you to think about what you think is a good use of your time. Like I said, this is honestly, I mean, how many groups do we create? One a month-ish? Like, this is not a huge place where we should spend a lot of engineering time.
There's more churn on staging groups, and I think you've expressed, like, those are another thing I wouldn't mind seeing tests. This blows scope, but just to digress for a second. Tim, you had opinions one time on how sometimes the various YAML files that are part of the setting up a staging process kind of fall out of sync. So you need like a group in groups.yaml. You need to make sure you have the right repo and manifest set up over in the k8s gcr.io subdirectories and stuff. You don't, that's something that could easily be encoded in a test to reduce review burden for like
totally
churn stuff.
And that's a place where that's like good return on investment, because we're going to have hundreds of those in the limit.
I agree, Nikita. Like whatever you feel is the best use of your time. And I think like encoding some of our standards and tests would be great.
I'll probably take a look over this over the weekend, so anything's fine. I'll take a look. I'll update the PR, and we'll see.
I was going to suggest
anything here is going to be better than what we have.
Yeah, I was going to suggest maybe you could merge it as is now and then have a follow-up PR to sort of like
That sounds okay.
escalate privileges with more automation.
Yeah, I agree with Aaron.
Sounds good. And I'll document all this stuff too because we're changing a lot.
Okay, thank you.
And I also got to run to another meeting. So I guess if that's okay for this topic.
All right,
No,
thank you.
thank you very much. Yeah. See you, Nikita. Okay, so the next topic is, which I've added, is the increasing billing quota escalation, because it's almost 1.5 months ago we created the ticket to bump it to 350 projects. And I asked today Ihor if there was some response, and nothing yet. So I don't know if he should escalate it or the team, because you told last time that there is some process was improved or something, and it shouldn't happen to wait for that
Yeah,
long.
they told me the process was improved. I chose at that time to let Ihor drive it as the actual customer because I don't want to go behind the curtain as much as possible. If we think that that's stalled and we've filed another request but we're not getting any response, I don't know if we have any metadata on, like, is there a ticket ID that was assigned or something, then I can reference that. Otherwise, I can file it again.
I would suggest Ihor to try escalate once more. If it won't happen, then maybe ask him for this metadata and try to do it internally.
Yeah, that's fine. Also, I mean, I wonder, I don't know how many projects we're at right now, but I wonder if, you know, if we're not getting close to the quota, if they're just going to ignore it anyway. It's a weird system. I got to admit, it's a weird way that it operates.
So I think that if you could just write the same thing in the issue, because I don't see Ihor here, that would be great. It's issue 852.
You got it.
Perfect. So the last topic in our agenda is the topic from Yodahe, and the mic is yours.
So just a really quick introduction in case people don't remember my introduction from the last meeting, but my name is Yodahe, Internet Google, working with Linus on the container image promoter for the summer. Basically what my work has been so far has just been creating a checks interface for adding more checks for the promoter. An example of a check that I have implemented is checking against pull requests that attempt to remove images from the promoter manifests. So you can imagine the checks are just things along those lines. What we're trying to work on right now is implementing a vulnerability image check. So basically a check against any pull requests that try to promote images with known vulnerabilities. So using, the container analysis service, specifically its vulnerability scanning API. If we check an image to see if it has any vulnerability information, and if it does, we see if the severity of that vulnerability is of some high enough level that we then reject the pull request. The image, or the question that kind of arises from that, and the reason I'm bringing it up to the community today is, do we have any strong opinions on the strictness of that check? If a vulnerability has a low severity or very low, so like a minimal severity, do we still allow the pull request to promote those images? Or do we just reject any image that has any vulnerabilities whatsoever?
So obviously images grow vulnerabilities over time, right? As we discover the vulnerabilities. And we're not going to kick images with vulnerabilities out of the main repository.
Yeah, this is purely moving from staging to production that we're checking.
Yeah. I see both sides of this. I hadn't thought about that facet before.
Is there any way that I, as an author of one of the staging images, would get advance notice that my image, excuse me, that my image is vulnerable prior to the promoter running against it?
So currently the check would be running in, oh, I see what you mean. That's actually something we are considering doing for like future work. So kind of surfacing these vulnerabilities before like the promoter needs to check against them, just to make things like clear for people. One thought process or like one idea we kind of discussed was maybe allowing people, you know, to kind of define within the manifest themselves what level of strictness images contained in that manifest will follow. So maybe we don't have like a one-off rule that's defined for everybody, just because different staging projects might have kind of different needs based off how strict we need to be.
That approach sounds useful because I think you could start with a default, and those who want to be more strict can be more strict, and you could raise it over time or something.
Okay.
I mean, is it useful for people to say, I don't care about medium vulnerabilities? Like hold on a second. As a project, like obviously we want to shoot for no vulnerabilities. That's a pretty high goal. I mean, it's unfortunate that we can't give them a direct signal right away. We could, I mean, this is just a problem we can throw money at and turn on vulnerability scanning on staging. But it's money that we'd have to spend. I don't know how much. The alternative is maybe just promote and flag right away. Is that gonna result? I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm sorry. Is that going to result in a bunch of images that are not updated? Gosh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want to interject or just add another related thought, which is there's an open issue around getting like vulnerability scanning for just production itself. And that's like the other side of this coin. Like, you know, Yodai is coming in from the perspective of adding some sort of visibility around new images getting promoted into production. But then there's the other side, which is after they're promoted, you know, do we continually scan images? And I think we should. So
we do, but we just don't publish the results in an appropriate way yet. Image scanning is turned on, right?
Right, but I mean, we currently don't. I mean, we do have scanning enabled for K8s-infra prod. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we do, but we don't have a clean way to publish it yet.
I mean, but like that's just the default, you know, scanning service that's turned on. It's not like we have visibility around, okay, what new images became vulnerable today? Like we don't know, right?
I mean, I'm not super familiar with the vulnerability service and I haven't had time to dig into it, but isn't there like a pub sub queue of vulnerabilities that you're supposed to subscribe to or something? Like, isn't that the mechanism?
Right, they can be, but currently we don't have anything that uses that.
Okay,
right?
Sure. But if I go look at it, I can see which ones are flagged. What we need to do is set up a pipeline that says, hey, new flags today and make it available to people. Is that sufficient? Like if I'm trying to put myself in a, you know, sub-project maintainer's shoes, right? I build my foobar image and I push it to my staging, or better, GCB builds it and pushes it to my staging, and I send a promotion PR, somebody approves my promotion PR, it's more or less rubber stamped because they trust me, and then a day later, something flags it and says, oh, by the way, this has a vulnerability. Like, I guess I'm going to be kind of grumpy that I didn't know about it sooner because now I have to go do that all again, right? So I guess to that end, like, it would be great if the pull request came back and said, hey, yo, we cannot promote this image because it has vulnerabilities, right? Like just don't, the promoter won't, like the pre-submit fails because it has vulnerabilities.
Right, and I guess the question is that enough? I mean, Aaron raised the question, which is, can I know about this sooner before I even create the pull request.
I think
and
at pull request time was sort of what I had in mind too. I like the idea of at least like when I'm trying to promote the action I'm taking to promote an image is I'm opening a pull request to add it to the manifest. And if at that time I get a test failure that says your image is vulnerable, you can't do this, then I can respond to it.
Yeah, that seems nice.
So that's what,
it's only part of the solution, but it seems like a nice part.
Yes. So that's what Yodai is, trying to implement first. And I think for future work, right, like we would want something that does consume the PubSub queue or something to have like a running, like live figures about, which images are vulnerable and expose that to, I suppose, people that we trust or certain image admins or artifact admins who can then police it or at least poke people about vulnerable images. But before we get there, right, the question is from Yodai, so you were asking Yodai earlier, what is the default and do we want like per staging repo or even something like per prefix settings for how strict the images are checked?
Yeah, exactly.
Like I'm not sure that offering more knobs is going to give us better security or better experience. Like, or let me put it another way. I'd rather wait for people to complain to say, "Ugh, you keep notifying me with these CVEs that don't matter to me. Why do I have to keep doing all this work?" I'd rather deal with a complaint than design a system in the absence of a signal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I guess I lean a little bit further forward than Tim. I anticipate there will be complaints, and I think the ability to specify on a per repo basis, overriding some default, would allow us to encode who's being more secure or less secure than our default. And
but why do we want to allow people to be less secure than the default?
We could say you're not allowed to do that. Like, I'm just without defining the policy today, I think in allowing us to encode the policy going forward defers us having to make that decision today. If it's a ton of extra engineering effort, then let's not do it. But it sounded like that was sort of part of the plan.
Okay, I'm going to give the floor back to Yodai if he has any other questions around this.
Yeah. Okay. I guess it seems like the focus is to just kind of, I mean, it seems like everybody's okay with just setting up a default for like this pre-submit check, and then I guess further discussion can occur for whether or not we have kind of more granularity or allow more choice in how strict we are. Another question I did have though was, for this check to work, I'm not sure. I don't think vulnerability scanning is currently enabled on all the staging projects, but it would have to be.
Okay. So that was the question I wanted to ask, and I forgot. Is there a way to trigger a vulnerability scan, or do we have to actually turn on vulnerability scanning on every staging? It sounds like it's the latter.
Yeah, it's the latter. The vulnerability scanning only occurs every time an image is pushed to a staging repo or it's pulled. And actually, it doesn't occur every time an image is pulled. It occurs at some, it's kind of like a cron job. It occurs like every certain amount of days, I guess, but it occurs for every image which has been pulled within the last 30 days.
And the reason that it's not turned on every staging repo is simply that's going to cost money, and so we turned it on the main repo once, because basically you pay every time an image is scanned. So when people push something to staging and then they never delete it out of staging, it's going to cost money every time that image gets scanned in perpetuity, and we're already going to pay that in the main repo. So I'm a little bit anxious about turning that on hundreds of staging repos. I mean, I guess worst case is it doubles the cost because everything is in two places.
Yeah.
I don't really know what that cost is yet. Like it's not high enough to turn up in our numbers, so maybe it's not a big deal.
Say there's only one way to find out.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not even sure that it gets broken out as a separate line item. I'm going to go look right now.
Okay. I guess just thinking live right now. Although I think, turning on the staging repo, I mean, I know it's a lot more cost. It seems like a cleaner alternative, but, and another option is kind of, we set up a separate project, which is meant for vulnerability scanning because every time, and we just kind of push images to those projects for testing or for vulnerability checking. And then do some like polling, I guess, to check when the initial scan is finished and get the results back. The issue with that, though, is kind of like kind of makes the test will take a lot longer to run, or the check will take a lot longer to run. But I mean, it does cut down on the costs that come from doing vulnerability scans on images that never get pushed to production.
I'm on a phone call. Thank you.
That sounds like a good alternative. I'm still, despite Tim laying out really big, scary numbers at the beginning, I'm still willing to live dangerously and see if we turned it on for everything right now, just what would that cost look like for our load today? To help us understand if it's worth engineering to use a separate project.
I think I would also risk to check.
All right. And then kind of like my last question is, and this is just more like infrastructural, just because I'm new to, kind of Kubernetes. In order to actually access this vulnerability information, I would need to create like a GCP service account. Is there any preference, I guess, on which service account I use, or if I create a new service account with the, authorization to access this vulnerability data, which, GCP project I use to build that service account off of?
I think that we would, the good way would be to create a Google group for that and then assign the service accounts as a member of Google group, for example, and actually do we.
Does it have to be a service account, or can it be any principal, like a user group? Or
yeah, exactly.
I mean, we can create service accounts based off of the Google groups, I'm pretty sure. So
if it has to be a service account, like I don't have a strong preference, but I guess the completely undocumented thing that I generally do is if it's a service account that's going to need to be reused across a bunch of projects, I create it in the Kubernetes public project. So
I've been wondering if we need to create a project that is just for hosting service accounts. I thought about it and then I decided it was too much work at the time, but maybe we should come back to that.
Given that we have a quota of projects, I sort of stopped treating projects like candy, but we could do that.
And
that's true.
Sorry,
can I just throw one data point out? I just looked at the billing for container images scanned, and I think that's the correct line item. Our year-to-date bill is less than $400. So you know what? We can just turn it on staging, and it's probably going to be fine. And if it turns out to not be fine, then we'll deal with it.
Woohoo!
I like the idea.
If somebody wants to send a pull request against the ensure staging script, and then we can go ahead and apply that.
Okay. I'll probably be sending that or making that pull request like later today.
Great.
Yeah, so you can expect that.
Just as an information, I just saw the update from Ihor, and it was his mistake, and the quota request was granted, and he just missed the email. So we have 350 projects right now granted. Okay, so any questions, any suggestions about this topic?
I have to say, I kind of like the idea of having a quarantine project where we push an image to the quarantine project, let it get scanned, and then delete it. But since the cost is so low, I don't think that's engineering that's worth doing.
I agree.
Me too.
It sounds like a fun project, just not worth doing.
Okay.
Okay, so as there is no other topics on our agenda, is there anything anyone would like to start discussing?
I have a question and also raise something because Tim talked about billing recently, and I have a pull request that's supposed to drop a node pull. It's about GH proxy, so I don't know if Aaron and Tim can look at these pull requests.
Sure, I'll take a look.
Wait.
I apologize. I might have gotten lost in my noise. This being code review week, I've got a lot of GitHub emails, and so I know I have accidentally deleted some that I shouldn't have deleted. Also, GitHub's email is broken.
Yeah, I spent all of yesterday going through PRs. I will probably do a lot more of that today. I'll check out the K8s-infra repo specifically.
Awesome.
Also, I have like one question about permission because during my experimentation with 3F Party, I faced one issue, but it was not possible for me to debug because I don't have log access to AAA. So I don't know how we can give read-only access to those logs to the Google groups.
I'm not sure I got the issue. So you mean you can't read logs?
I can just have access to GK logs right now if I have an issue with, for example, the ingress.
So you can kubectl get logs, but you can't use Stackdriver?
No, I can use Stackdriver.
You can use Stackdriver.
No.
Oh, you cannot use Stackdriver. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we can figure out what the right credential for that is, we can just give it to all of the namespace owner groups. I don't see any reason why we can't have everybody reading each other's logs. That does not seem like a big deal for us.
Okay, I think I will do a PR later about that.
Okay. Yeah, I would have done it. I just don't know what the credential is off the top of my head.
Okay.
Okay, so any questions, suggestions about this topic?
No, I just wanted to thank you for working through all of the random stumbles you've had with getting Triage Party up and running. I know it's been a long effort. Please keep asking for help and poke us if we're not being responsive enough, because this is all like, I know this is can be annoying.
Yeah,
I think your use case is a pretty solid use case where you are a member of the community. You want to run an app. We all looked at the app. We like the app. Now we want you to go and do. And you keep kind of tripping into these things that are like, it's a great friction log for anybody who wants to run stuff on our infrastructure. So anything we can do to help make your life easier, I think will pay dividends to anybody who wants to run infrastructure on our platform.
For sure. The sad truth is most of the things that are running today are being run by people who have larger privilege already. So it's hard to know where the bumps are because we've got much bigger tires. And so it's great to have you come through and sort of bulldoze a clean path. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you very much. So as we have only 4 minutes, so maybe small update from me about the DNS automation. So this job is working in the dry run mode for, I think, a month or so already. Everything looks fine. So I'm kind of quite I think we should try to run it in the normal production mode, do it mode. And the only thing which is missing about this topic is I'm not still sure if we want to connect the logs to the our Slack channel. And if so, as we discussed before, then I probably will have to have some guidance from Linus or TeamView how to do it.
To send it to the alerts channel, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, the way we've set up the automation on the alerts right now is we're using Stackdriver's error reporting to send that. Not error reporting, metrics reporting. So we could. Sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you're talking about having the proud job fail, like if the job run fails to push some DNS records or something, and you want that to alert to the Slack channel, Prow has a Slack reporter that I think can be configured on a per job and per channel basis.
That sounds great. I was gonna say we could add, like if we're logging to Stackdriver, we could add a log metric that triggers an alert. But I'm not sure that an alert is really what you want.
I actually think that the suggestion from Aaron is nice. I definitely will look at it and suggest try.
I mean, it would be nice to have a message sent that just says, hey, I did a DNS push. If anybody wants to see, here's the log, right? It was successful, but here's the log.
I agree.
And then the error one, of course, is like a big deal.
Yeah, so I will play around it, and maybe I will find some quick solution to implement it, to show at our next meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so there are 2 minutes more. Is there any topic we would like to start? Some comments, some suggestions?
Just want to tell to Aaron, I'm happy to help about job migration.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Cool. We'll connect offline. Thank you.
Okay, so as there is no other topics, I would like to thank you all for attending our today's call, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day.